Nobody expected a slice of dry bread and a cup of water to ignite a revolution. Yet when Derek Patterson boarded that first-class flight to New York, the tech executive wasn't just starting a journey across the country, he was setting in motion events that would reshape an entire industry. As the flight attendant placed the meager offering before him with a cutting remark, "This meal fits you," the other passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. By morning, the tech CEO wouldn't just own the airline that employed her, he'd transform it, completely turning one man's humiliation into a reckoning that forced an entire industry to confront its darkest shadows. Some revolutions begin with gunfire. This one started with a slice of bread. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The early morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window as Derek Patterson zipped up his carry-on luggage. His movements were precise, deliberate, the actions of a man who had traveled countless times before. At 39, the tech executive had long since perfected his pre-flight routine. As he double-checked his travel documents and made sure his phone charger was securely packed, his wife Sarah watched from the edge of the bed, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and concern. "You sure you have everything?" Sarah asked, helping him tuck in a stray shirt sleeve. Derek nodded, his calm demeanor masking the quiet intensity in his dark eyes. "Everything that matters," he replied, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes business dealings. The sound of small footsteps thundering down the hallway broke the moment. Their 8-year-old daughter Lily burst into the bedroom, still in her pajamas, her curly hair bouncing with every step. She launched herself at her father, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Do you have to go, Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him with wide, questioning eyes. Derek knelt down to meet her gaze. "Just for a few days, Princess," he said, straightening her Wonder Woman pajama top. "And when I come back, everything's gonna be different." Lily's forehead creased. "Different? Better?" A smile spread across Derek's face as he tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "Better. Much better." Sarah checked her watch. The car should be here any minute. As if on cue, Derek's phone buzzed with a notification. "Limo's outside," he confirmed. He gave Lily one more hug, kissed Sarah goodbye, and headed downstairs with his luggage. Through the front window, he could see the sleek black car waiting in the driveway, the driver already standing at attention beside the rear door. Just as Derek reached for the front door handle, his phone rang. Harper Williams, his assistant of 3 years, was calling. He answered immediately. "Morning, Harper, everything set?" "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," Harper replied, her voice crisp and efficient. "Just confirming your final meeting destination. The tech merger will take place at the Grand Horizon Hotel in New York, penthouse conference room, 9 a.m. tomorrow. The FOSS board members have all confirmed their attendance." "Perfect. Make sure legal has those revised terms ready for my review on landing." "Already done. They'll be waiting in your secure email." "Safe travels, sir." Derek ended the call and stepped outside. The early autumn air carried a slight chill, a welcome change from the summer heat. The driver nodded respectfully as Derek approached. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson. JFK International today?" "That's right, Ted. Terminal 4. The driver took his luggage and held the door open. Derek slid into the plush leather seat, already mentally reviewing the presentation he would deliver tomorrow, the culmination of months of careful negotiation and strategic planning. As the car pulled away from his suburban home, Derek gazed out the window at the manicured lawns and stately houses of his neighborhood. After tomorrow's meeting, his position in this world would be even more secure. Everything was falling into place. 40 minutes later, the limo pulled up to the departures level at Terminal 4. Derek had changed into his travel clothes, a comfortable gray hoodie, designer jeans, and limited edition sneakers. It was a deliberate choice. In the boardroom, he wore bespoke suits that commanded respect, but when traveling, he preferred comfort. And if he was being honest with himself, he'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. Sometimes, he even preferred it that way. The terminal bustled with morning travelers, the air filled with the sounds of rolling luggage, overhead announcements, and the low murmur of hundreds of conversations. Derek made his way to the first-class check-in counter, his walk unhurried but purposeful. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair and a tight smile was finishing with another passenger. When it was Derek's turn, her eyes flickered over him, taking in the casual hoodie and jeans. Her smile faded slightly. "Good morning," Derek said, placing his ID and platinum status card on the counter. The clerk glanced at his documents, then back at him. "Coach line is that way, sir," she said, gesturing to a much longer line several counters down. Derek maintained his composure, having experienced this reaction countless times before. "I'm flying first class," he replied evenly. The clerk's eyebrows raised slightly as she took his documents again, examining them more closely this time. Her fingers moved quickly over her keyboard, and Derek could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind as she double-checked his reservation. "I see," she finally said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "You're confirmed in first class to New York." She proceeded to process his ticket, her movements stiff and mechanical. When she finally handed over his boarding pass, she gave him a tight nod. "Gate 43. Boarding begins in 45 minutes. "Thank you," Derek said graciously, taking his documents and shouldering his carry-on. As he turned to walk away, he caught the clerk's micro-expression, that fleeting look that spoke volumes about her assumptions and prejudices. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but Derek didn't miss it. He never did. Walking toward security, Derek passed a customer service desk where airline staff were enthusiastically offering lounge access and complimentary champagne to a group of travelers in business suits. The same staff member glanced at Derek as he passed by but made no offer, despite the platinum tag on his luggage. Rather than confront the slight, he continued walking. He'd learned long ago to choose his battles carefully. As he neared the security checkpoint, Derek noticed an older white man struggling with an oversized suitcase, trying unsuccessfully to lift it onto the conveyor belt. Without hesitation, Derek stepped forward. "Let me give you a hand with that," he offered, easily lifting the heavy bag onto the belt. The man, white-haired and well into his 70s, looked surprised but grateful. "Thank you, young man," he said with a nod. As Derek moved past him, through the metal detector, he noticed a couple watching the interaction. The woman leaned toward her partner and whispered something. Though Derek couldn't hear her words, he recognized the assumption in their glances. They thought he was an airport employee. After clearing security, Derek made his way to Gate 43. The waiting area was already filling with passengers. He found an empty seat and settled in, pulling out his tablet to review some documents before boarding. 20 minutes later, the gate agent announced the start of boarding. "We would like to welcome our first-class passengers and platinum status members to board at this time." Derek gathered his belongings and stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. As he moved toward the jet bridge, he could feel eyes on him. From behind, a man's voice carried clearly. "Guess they'll let anyone up front these days." The comment was clearly meant to be overheard. Derek didn't turn around. He'd heard worse, and tomorrow's merger was too important to get distracted by petty prejudice. On board the aircraft, Derek found his seat, 2A, a window seat in the first row of first class. He stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into the spacious leather seat. The cabin was still relatively empty, with only a few other first-class passengers boarding. A flight attendant named Claudia, according to her name tag, moved efficiently through the cabin, offering pre-flight beverages to the passengers already seated. When she spotted Derek, she paused, her smile faltering. She turned to another crew member, a tall man with blonde hair, and muttered something. Though she kept her voice low, Derek clearly heard her say, "He's in the wrong cabin." The male attendant glanced over, his expression neutral before continuing with his preparations. Derek pretended not to notice, focusing instead on setting up his tablet for the flight ahead. Inside, however, he logged the moment away, another data point in an all-too-familiar pattern. As more passengers boarded, Derek gazed out the window, watching the ground crew prepare the aircraft for departure. In less than 24 hours, the merger would be complete, and he would have even more influence to change situations exactly like this one. One company at a time, one policy at a time. For now, though, he would observe, document, and prepare for what was to come. The cabin quickly filled with the remaining first-class passengers as boarding continued. Derek kept his focus on his tablet, reviewing notes for tomorrow's presentation while occasionally glancing out the window. He was deep in concentration when a shadow fell across his tray table. "Sir, this section is reserved for first-class passengers." Looking up, Derek found Claudia standing over him, her lips pulled into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her tone was laced with artificial politeness, the kind that barely masked underlying assumptions. Without saying a word, Derek calmly reached into his pocket and produced his boarding pass. He handed it to her silently, his expression neutral despite the familiar sting of the interaction. Claudia took the pass, examining it with obvious skepticism. Her eyes darted between the document and Derek's face, as if trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she had expected. After a moment, she gave a dry chuckle, not one of humor but of surprise mixed with something darker. "I see," she said flatly, handing the boarding pass back to him. She turned and walked away without another word, no apology forthcoming for her incorrect assumption. From the corner of his eye, Derek noticed the male flight attendant, Lars, according to his name tag, watching the interaction. He made no move to intervene, instead turning away to offer orange juice and champagne to the other first-class passengers, all of whom were white. As the last of the passengers boarded, making their way through first class to the main cabin, Derek noticed several giving him a second glance. Two women in business attire passed by, one leaning close to the other to whisper something that made both of them look back at him. Private security, maybe? Or a lottery winner? The words drifted clearly to where Derek sat, not meant to be. Overheard but spoken with little concern if they were. Derek maintained his composure, keeping his focus on his tablet where he was reviewing a last-minute presentation for the boardroom pitch he would give the next day. The merger between OrionJet Technologies, his company, and the airline was nearly complete, but there were still details to finalize, questions to anticipate from the board. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Claudia strolling past him multiple times, offering pre-flight beverages and warm towels to other passengers. Each time she purposefully skipped his row, avoiding eye contact as if he weren't there at all. Derek had experienced this kind of treatment before. The subtle exclusions, the deliberate oversights. They were familiar, almost predictable in their pattern. Still, each occurrence carried its own unique sting, a reminder of how much work remained to be done. The final passenger in first class arrived just before the doors were scheduled to close. She was a younger white woman, perhaps in her early 30s, dressed in jeans and a casual sweater not unlike Derek's own attire. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a leather messenger bag over her shoulder. She took the seat across the aisle from Derek, settling in with practiced ease. Immediately, Claudia approached her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, miss. Can I offer you a glass of champagne or orange juice before we depart?" "Champagne would be lovely, thank you," the woman replied, returning the smile. "And would you care for some warm nuts or a small fruit plate to start?" Claudia asked, her tone friendly and accommodating. "Nuts would be perfect." Claudia nodded and hurried off to fulfill the request, returning moments later with a flute of bubbling champagne and a small porcelain dish of warm mixed nuts. "Here you are. Let me know if you need anything else at all." The contrast between this interaction and Claudia's treatment of Derek was stark and undeniable. The woman across the aisle seemed to notice it too, her eyes flickering between Derek and the retreating flight attendant with a furrowed brow. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers and announcing their flight time to New York. As the safety demonstration began, Derek closed his tablet and tucked it into the seat pocket, preparing for takeoff. Once they were airborne and the seatbelt sign had been turned off, the cabin crew began their in-flight service. Claudia moved through the first-class cabin with a cart, distributing warm towels and taking meal orders from passengers. When she reached Derek's row, her demeanor changed. The professional smile she had offered to others disappeared, replaced by a cold, detached expression. Without offering him a warm towel, She moved on to the next passenger, deliberately skipping him again. A few minutes later, she returned with a tray in hand. As she approached Derek's seat, a sarcastic smirk played at the corners of her mouth. She placed a single small plate in front of him, containing nothing but a dry slice of bread and a clear plastic cup of water. "Here you go," she said, her voice carrying a mocking undertone. "This meal fits you." The comment hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. A stunned silence fell over the immediate area. The woman across the aisle looked up sharply, her expression horrified. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle and one row ahead turned slightly, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips before he quickly faced forward again. Derek stared at the plate, his expression carefully controlled. Years of navigating corporate America as a black executive had taught him to manage his reactions precisely, to never give those looking to provoke him the satisfaction of seeing him lose composure. "Is this the standard first-class meal?" he asked calmly, his voice even. Claudia shrugged, feigning innocence. "We ran out of options." The lie was transparent. She hadn't even bothered to check the meal service cart or offer him any choices. From across the aisle, the blonde woman called out, "Excuse me?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. Claudia turned, her expression instantly transforming back into professional pleasantness. "Yes, miss? Can I help you?" "Could I see the menu, please?" the woman asked. Of course. Claudia retrieved a menu card from her station and handed it to the woman with a smile. After glancing at the menu, the woman looked up at Claudia. "Why didn't he receive one?" She nodded toward Derek. Claudia's smile tightened. "Some people don't seem like they'd care for fine dining," she responded coolly, the implication clear in her tone. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief, but before she could respond, Derek pulled out his phone. Without fanfare, he opened the camera app and quietly took a picture of the bread and water in front of him, then angled the phone to capture Claudia's name tag. Noticing his actions, Claudia's expression flickered briefly with uncertainty before hardening again. "Photography of crew members is discouraged," she said. Derek didn't respond. Instead, he opened his messaging app and composed a simple text, attaching the photos he had just taken. The message read only, "Make sure you're watching this flight." He sent it to Harper, his assistant, knowing she would understand exactly what to do with the information. This wasn't the first time Derek had documented such treatment, but it was perhaps the most blatant example he'd encountered in years. As Claudia moved away to serve other passengers, the woman across the aisle leaned toward Derek. "I can't believe what just happened," she said in a low voice. "That was completely inappropriate." Derek gave her a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you for noticing," he said simply. "I'm Emily, by the way," she offered, extending her hand across the aisle. "Derek Patterson," he replied, accepting the handshake. Emily looked as if she might say more, but just then, Claudia returned to her row with a steaming plate of what appeared to be filet mignon, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a glass of red wine. "Your meal, miss," Claudia said pleasantly, placing the tray in front of Emily. "Can I get you anything else?" Emily glanced at Derek's bread and water, then back at Claudia. "Actually, yes. I'd like to know why this gentleman hasn't been offered the same meal options as everyone else in first class." Claudia's smile faltered. "As I mentioned, we've run out of some options." "Really?" Emily's voice was skeptical. "Because I just watched you serve the same meal to someone 3 rows back." Claudia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'll check if there's anything available," she said stiffly before walking away. Emily turned back to Derek, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this." "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon," Derek replied, his voice low enough that only Emily could hear him. "But this time it's being documented." Emily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Good." Derek glanced down at his phone, which had just vibrated with an incoming message from Harper. "Received. Security teams are monitoring. Continue documenting." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, feeling a peculiar mix of emotions. There was the familiar burn of indignity, the weight of yet another incident to add to a lifetime of similar experiences. But beneath that was something else, a calm certainty that this time would be different. Tomorrow, after the merger was finalized, Derek wouldn't just be a first-class passenger that flight attendants like Claudia could disrespect with impunity. He would be a major stakeholder in the company that employed them. The power dynamic was about to shift dramatically as the flight continued. Claudia made no attempt to correct her earlier behavior. She moved through the cabin serving elaborate meals and refilling drinks for other passengers, studiously avoiding Derek's gaze and ignoring his row entirely. Lars, the male flight attendant who had witnessed the earlier interactions without intervening, occasionally glanced in Derek's direction with what might have been discomfort, but he too made no move to offer service or correct the situation. The bread and water sat untouched on Derek's tray table, a visual testament to the treatment he had received. Several times he noticed other passengers looking at the meager offering with confused or concerned expressions, but most quickly averted their eyes when they realized he had noticed their gaze. Emily, however, made no attempt to hide her outrage. She ate her meal slowly, frequently glancing across the aisle at Derek with expressions that ranged from sympathy to anger on his behalf. When Claudia came to collect her empty plate, Emily deliberately asked, "Has the gentleman across from me been offered a proper meal yet?" Claudia's smile was strained. "I'll check again," she said, though her tone made it clear she had no intention of doing so. As the flight approached its midpoint, Derek's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from someone else on his executive team. "All systems monitoring flight, UA 1428, video feeds accessed. Documentation ongoing." Derek allowed himself a small smile. By the time this plane landed in New York, every minute of Claudia's behavior would be cataloged, every slight recorded and time-stamped, the merger paperwork waiting for his signature. Tomorrow suddenly seemed to carry even more significance than before. He looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about what his daughter had asked that morning. Better? Yes, he had promised. Things would be better, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than human because of someone else's prejudice. The flight continued, and with it, the subtle and not so subtle demonstrations of bias. But Derek remained calm, collecting evidence and biding his time. In less than 24 hours, the real journey would begin, one toward accountability and change. After sending the text to Harper, Derek slipped his phone back into his pocket and gazed. Out the window, the bread and water sat untouched on his tray table, a visual testament to his experience. Below, endless fields of clouds stretched like a pristine white carpet illuminated by brilliant sunshine, a stark contrast to the ugliness transpiring within the cabin. As he stared at the passing clouds, Derek's mind drifted to past incidents. The sales clerk who had followed him around a luxury store, the valet who had handed the keys to his own car to a white stranger, the hotel staff who had questioned his presence in the executive lounge. Each memory stung, but this incident on the plane felt more blatant, more deliberate than most, perhaps because he was literally captive at 30,000 feet with nowhere to go. Across the aisle, Emily watched Claudia continue serving other passengers. First-class travelers around them were being presented with filet mignon, seared salmon, and perfectly cooked vegetables accompanied by fine wines in real glassware. The contrast with Derek's dry bread and water could not have been more pronounced. Claudia worked her way methodically through the cabin, carefully skipping Derek's row each time. The other flight attendants followed her lead, avoiding eye contact with him as if he were invisible. Emily, unable to contain her frustration any longer, leaned across the aisle toward Derek. "I saw what happened," she whispered. "That wasn't right. Are you okay?" Derek gave her a small, appreciative smile. "I've seen worse," he replied softly. "But this one's being documented." A silver-haired man seated in front of them turned slightly, overhearing their conversation. He was in his 60s, dressed in an expensive suit with gold cufflinks that caught the light whenever he moved his hands. He studied Derek with undisguised curiosity. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to wealth and power. "Couldn't help but overhear. What do you do, young man?" The question was loaded, carrying the implicit assumption that Derek needed to justify his presence in first class. Derek recognized the type immediately. Old money, probably East Coast. Accustomed to a certain social hierarchy that rarely included people who looked like him. "I run a small tech company," Derek answered simply, neither defensive nor eager to impress. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, startups. Cute." His tone was dismissive, patting Derek on the head metaphorically. "I'm Charles Kessler, banking." He offered the information as if it settled his position in the unspoken hierarchy. "Derek Patterson," he replied with a polite nod, choosing not to elaborate further. "Let Kessler make his assumptions." Kessler turned back to his drink, his curiosity seemingly satisfied, having placed Derek neatly into a box labeled inconsequential. The arrogance in his dismissal was palpable, thickening the already tense atmosphere. From the galley, Derek could hear the flight attendants talking in hushed tones. They weren't as quiet as they thought they were, or perhaps they simply didn't care if he heard. "Coach Guy is still waiting for a real meal," one of them said, followed by muffled laughter. "Maybe he's not used to our menu," another replied. "Probably expected fried chicken." The casual racism made Derek's jaw clench momentarily before he forced himself to relax. He discreetly pressed the record button on his phone, capturing the conversation. Every word, every slight was being added to the growing file of evidence. His phone vibrated again with a new message from Harper. "Security teams are in place at JFK. Everything going as planned?" Derek typed back quickly. "Better than expected. They're writing their own downfall." The sound of his notification caught Claudia's attention as she passed by his seat. She paused, her gaze falling on his phone. "Sir, I need to ask you to put your phone in airplane mode for security compliance," she said, her voice carrying a note of authority it hadn't had before. "It is in airplane mode," Derek replied calmly. "I'm just reviewing some documents." "I'll need to see it for verification," she insisted, extending her hand expectantly. Derek looked her directly in the eye. "That's not within your authority," he stated quietly but firmly. "FAA regulations permit the use of devices in airplane mode during flight, but they don't grant flight attendants the right to inspect passengers' personal property without cause. I'm familiar with airline privacy laws." Claudia's expression hardened, but she withdrew her hand. As she turned away, she muttered something under her breath, not quite quietly enough. Derek caught every word, and so did his phone's recording app. A few minutes later, Lars, the second flight attendant, approached Derek's seat with what appeared to be an attempt at a friendly expression. He leaned in slightly, speaking in a low voice. "Sorry about earlier," he said, his eyes darting nervously to where Claudia was serving another passenger. "She gets territorial with certain passengers." The way he emphasized certain made it clear what he meant, though he clearly wanted to avoid saying anything explicitly incriminating. It was the kind of half-apology that acknowledged a wrong without taking any real responsibility. The verbal equivalent of a shrug. Derek looked Lars directly in the eye, his gaze steady and uncompromising. "You still serve next to her," he said simply. "That's all I need to know." The words landed with precision. Lars's face flushed, and he straightened abruptly, visibly shaken by the direct confrontation of his complicity. Without another word, he retreated to the galley. Emily, who had witnessed the exchange, gave Derek a small nod of approval. "Bystanders," she murmured. "Sometimes they're worse than the instigators." "They're certainly more common," Derek agreed softly. The cabin speakers crackled, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hollins speaking. We're cruising at an altitude of 36,000 feet with clear skies ahead. Our estimated arrival time in New York remains on schedule. The current temperature in New York is 68 degrees with partly cloudy skies. We'll be starting our initial descent in about 40 minutes. In the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy the remainder of your flight." At the sound of the captain's voice, Derek's expression changed subtly. A slight furrow appeared between his brows, and his eyes narrowed in recognition. Captain Hollins, a name he knew well, though not for good reasons, Derek had specifically requested that Hollins not be assigned to this flight when he'd arranged the anonymous quality audit through back channels. The fact that Hollins was piloting the aircraft was a serious red flag. It suggested either incompetence in following the directive, or, more likely, deliberate sabotage. Either way, it added another layer of complexity to the situation unfolding aboard this flight. Derek's phone vibrated again with another message from Harper. Captain ID confirmed as Hollins. James R3 previous complaints filed against him, all buried by HR. Derek typed back. Noted. Continue monitoring all channels. As he put his phone away, he caught Claudia watching him from the galley, her expression cold and calculating. She whispered something to Lars, who glanced at Derek before quickly looking away. It was clear that despite their attempt at subtlety, something about Derek had them on edge, which was exactly as he had planned. The flight continued, and the masks began to slip further. Charles Kessler ordered another scotch, becoming more boisterous with each drink. He struck up a conversation with another older white passenger across the aisle, their voices carrying easily in the confined space of the first-class cabin. Flying isn't what it used to be, Kessler commented, just loud enough for Derek to hear. They let anyone up front these days if they can scrape together the miles. His companion chuckled. Standards have certainly changed. Back in my day, there was a certain quality to the clientele. The thinly veiled racism wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Emily looked genuinely appalled, while Derek maintained his composed exterior, neither reacting nor engaging. He simply continued reviewing documents on his tablet, seemingly absorbed in his work while missing nothing of what transpired around him. As the plane began its initial descent into New York, the pieces of Derek's plan were falling into place, one by one. Tomorrow, the merger would be announced, and with it would come a reckoning that none of these people saw coming. A reckoning that had been set in motion the moment Claudia had placed that dry slice of bread and cup of water in front of him. Justice, Derek reflected, sometimes arrived on its own schedule, but it always eventually arrived. As the captain announced the beginning of their descent into New York, Derek quietly pulled his tablet from the seat pocket. While other passengers began putting away their belongings, he opened an application that bore no name, just a simple blue icon with a white pulse line running through it. He entered a complex passcode, followed by a fingerprint scan. The screen flashed briefly before loading a sleek, minimalist interface labeled SkyPulse at the top, a proprietary system his company had built for airline operational monitoring. While the public knew OrionJet Technologies primarily as a software provider for flight management systems, the company's reach extended far deeper into airline operations than most realized. With a few discreet taps, Derek accessed a private network connected directly to the airline's internal operations system. The tablet screen filled with scrolling data, flight paths, crew assignments, maintenance logs, and, most importantly for his current situation, personnel files. A search prompt appeared. Derek typed, Flight Narber UA1428, and the screen populated, with information about the current flight, including complete profiles of every crew member on board. His eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the data, focusing on two names in particular: Claudia Reynolds, lead flight attendant, and James Hollins, captain. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Both employee files contained multiple past reports of bias incidents and customer service complaints, all marked as resolved or inconclusive, with minimal disciplinary action. There was a pattern here, one that had been systematically ignored by management. Derek tapped on Claudia's file, expanding the details. 3 formal complaints in the past year alone, all filed by passengers of color, all conveniently dismissed, due to insufficient evidence or misunderstanding. One passenger had even provided video evidence, only to have it deemed inconclusive by a review board. Captain Hollins's record was similarly troubling. 2 incidents of refusing to address female first officers by their proper rank, 1 case of making inappropriate comments about a Muslim passenger that had been overheard by another crew member, and a formal reprimand for unprofessional communication, with ground staff of color. None of these incidents had resulted in any meaningful consequences. Each had been swept neatly under the rug by an airline culture that prioritized protecting its own over addressing systemic problems. As Derek reviewed the files, his mind flashed back to a board meeting he had attended 4 months earlier. He had been there as a silent partner during the initial acquisition talks, his presence known only to the CEO and a handful of top executives. The head of HR had proudly announced that the airline had inclusivity under control and that their diversity initiatives were industry-leading. Derek had harbored doubts even then, but he had chosen to reserve judgment until he could see for himself. Now, with the evidence literally in his hands, his suspicions were confirmed. The problem went deeper than individual bad actors. It was institutional, systemic, and in desperate need of correction. A notification popped up on his screen, a live feed from the cabin's security cameras, accessible only to authorized personnel with the highest security clearance. Derek had that clearance, though none of the crew would have expected a passenger to possess it. Through the feed, he could see Claudia in the galley, whispering to another flight attendant while occasionally glancing in his direction. Their body language was tense, conspiratorial. The other attendant looked uncomfortable but nodded along. Derek noted the timestamp on the feed. Evidence, all of it, evidence for what would come later. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime, and a minor turbulence warning flashed on Derek's SkyPulse app seconds before the captain announced it over the intercom. The plane began to experience light bumps as it passed through a pocket of unstable air. Claudia moved quickly through the cabin, checking that passengers had fastened their seatbelts. When she reached Derek's row, her professional demeanor dropped entirely. "Seatbelt now," she snapped, her tone sharp and condescending, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. She spoke to him as one might address a disobedient child, not a first-class passenger. Derek calmly complied, maintaining eye contact as he fastened his seatbelt with a deliberate click. "Thank you for the reminder," he said evenly. As Claudia moved on, Derek discreetly activated his phone's voice recording app. Each interaction was now being documented, not just in his memory, but in hard evidence that would be difficult to dismiss later. The turbulence increased slightly, causing the plane to dip and sway. Charles Kessler, now on his third scotch, raised his hand to summon a flight attendant. Lars responded quickly, leaning down to hear Kessler's request. "Another drink, my good man," Kessler said loudly. "And tell me, what's the deal with our friend over there?" He gestured toward Derek without any attempt at subtlety. "Doesn't quite fit the usual profile, does he?" Lars looked uncomfortable, but managed a tight smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't serve additional alcohol during turbulence. Captain's orders." Kessler waved dismissively. Fine. But you have to admit it's unusual. Probably used his company points or something. Diversity hires getting all the perks these days." The comment was clearly intended to be overheard. From the galley, Claudia's muffled laughter reached Derek's ears, picked up clearly by his recording app. Emily, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "That's disgusting," she said, her voice firm and carrying. "Do you even hear yourself?" Kessler turned, surprise evident on his face. He clearly hadn't expected to be challenged. "Just making conversation, young lady. No need to get emotional. It's not conversation when you're making racist assumptions about another passenger," Emily shot back. "It's bigotry, and it's pathetic." Claudia emerged from the galley, her face tight with irritation. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We need to maintain a calm environment." Emily's eyebrows shot up. "So his comments are fine, but my objection to them is a problem?" "You can't police how people feel, miss," Claudia responded with thinly veiled hostility. Derek, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but clear, carrying easily in the tense cabin. "Actually, discrimination violates FAA Conduct Code Part 382, he said calmly. "It specifically prohibits airlines and their employees from discriminating against passengers on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry." The cabin fell silent. All eyes turned to Derek, who continued to maintain his composed demeanor despite being the center of attention. Claudia's face flushed with anger. "You think quoting codes makes you right?" she asked, her professional mask slipping completely now. Derek allowed himself a small smile, not mocking, just confident. "No," he replied simply. "But the person writing those codes? That'd be me." The statement hung in the air, its impact rippling through the first-class cabin. Claudia stared at Derek, confusion evident in her expression as she tried to process what he had just said. Slowly, a flicker of recognition crept across her face, not quite understanding but the first inkling that she might have seriously misjudged the situation. Lars, standing nearby, looked rapidly between Derek and Claudia, his discomfort now plainly visible. Emily watched the exchange with growing interest, her eyes bright with the realization that there was more to Derek Patterson than met the eye. Kessler, momentarily silenced, studied Derek with new wariness. The casual dismissal in his earlier appraisal was gone, replaced by uncertainty. The plane continued its descent toward New York, the lights of the city beginning to appear through the windows as dusk settled over the landscape. But inside the cabin, a different kind of illumination was taking place. The slow, dawning recognition that power isn't always where you expect to find it. Claudia abruptly turned and stormed back to the galley, her movements stiff with barely contained anger. Through the gap in the curtain, Derek could see her grabbing a tablet and furiously tapping at the screen. He knew exactly what she was doing, searching the airline's employee database for his name. He could almost count down the seconds until she found what she was looking for. 3, 2, 1. Her face went pale. Derek Patterson, CEO of Orion Jet Technologies, the company that was in the final stages of merging with this very airline, the merger that would give him substantial control over airline operations, including personnel decisions. A memory flashed through Claudia's mind, an email that had circulated a week ago about the upcoming merger. It had mentioned that the Orion Jet CEO had requested quality assurance measures during the transition period. No one had paid much attention to the corporate speak. Now, too late, she understood. This flight, this passenger, had been part of an anonymous quality audit. Derek's idea, his way of seeing the airline's true culture before he took the reins. "Claudia," whispered urgently to Lars, who glanced over at Derek with new understanding and fear in his eyes. The news spread quickly among the crew, their behavior shifting visibly as the realization of who they had been mistreating dawned on them. Claudia returned to the cabin, her demeanor completely transformed. She approached Derek with a smile, so forced it looked painful. "Mr. Patterson, can I offer you a glass of champagne?" she asked, her voice saccharine sweet. "No need for theatrics now," Derek replied calmly. "What's done is done." Kessler, overhearing the exchange, leaned forward in his seat. "Patterson? Wait, you're that Derek Patterson? The tech mogul?" The same man who had dismissed Derek as a cute startup founder just an hour earlier now looked at him with naked recognition. The shift was so transparent, it would have been comical under different circumstances. Kessler extended his hand, his expression eager. "Charles Kessler, Eastland Banking. I think we may have mutual connections in the financial sector. We should talk." Derek regarded the offered hand without moving. After a moment, Kessler awkwardly withdrew it, his confidence deflating under Derek's steady gaze. In the cockpit, Captain Hollins received a message from Claudia. "Priority, PSGR-2A is D. Patterson, CEO of Orion Jet. Merger principal, situation critical." Hollins's face hardened as he read the message. "Should have taken him off before takeoff," he muttered to his co-pilot. "This is going to be a disaster." The co-pilot, a younger man named Thomas Parker, looked nervous. "What's going on? Who is he?" "The man who's about to own half this airline," Hollins replied grimly. "And apparently Reynolds has been giving him the special treatment." Parker's eyes widened. "The bread and water thing? That was him?" "Jesus. Who approved this flight assignment?" Hollins didn't answer, focusing instead on the approach to JFK. His mind was racing, calculating the potential fallout. Perhaps there was still a way to minimize the damage, to explain away what had happened as a misunderstanding. Back in the cabin, Derek's phone buzzed with another message from Harper. "We just pulled the security footage from the cabin. It's worse than we thought. Multiple violations, clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. Legal is preparing briefing materials." Derek typed back a simple response. "Compile. Send to legal and PR." Emily, who had been watching the sudden shift in how others were treating Derek, leaned across the aisle again. "I'm a journalist," she said quietly. "With the Post. Would it be all right if I spoke with you on record about what I've witnessed here today?" Derek considered her request thoughtfully. "Not yet," he finally said. "Let them finish digging." Emily nodded, understanding, immediately. Sometimes the best strategy was to give someone enough rope to hang themselves. The change in the cabin atmosphere was palpable. Flight attendants who had previously ignored Derek now hovered anxiously, offering him amenities he had been denied earlier. Claudia, in particular, seemed determined to rewrite history, offering extra pillows, premium snacks, and solicitous inquiries about his comfort, all of which he politely declined. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a fresh glass of water near Derek, the ice cubes clinking nervously against the crystal. Her smile was fixed, her eyes darting between Derek and her tablet, which now displayed his complete profile, including his substantial holdings in the airline's parent company. Meanwhile, word had spread throughout the first-class cabin. Passengers who had previously averted their eyes or whispered about Derek were now stealing glances of a different sort. Curious, sometimes admiring, occasionally apprehensive. The social hierarchy had been abruptly reordered, and no one quite knew how to navigate the new reality. Derek received another alert on his tablet, a notification that a recording from another passenger had already gone viral on social media. Someone had captured Claudia's "This meal fits you" comment on video and shared it online. The airline's reputation was taking a hit in real time, the hashtag "Your bread and water flights" already trending. Claudia, seemingly desperate to salvage the situation, approached Derek once more. Her earlier arrogance was completely gone, replaced by naked fear. "Mr. Patterson," she began, her voice low and urgent. "I didn't know who you were." Derek looked up at her, his expression calm but unyielding. "And that's exactly the problem," he replied simply. The truth of those words hung in the air between them, more damning than any accusation could have been. The implication was clear. Her behavior would have been unacceptable regardless of who he was, regardless of his title, his wealth, or his influence. It was a truth Claudia couldn't escape, no matter how desperately she now wished to rewrite the narrative of the past few hours. In trying to put Derek in his place, she had revealed more about herself than she had ever intended, and now that revelation was on record, documented for all to see. As the plane continued its descent toward JFK, the city lights growing brighter below, Derek gazed out the window with a mixture of emotions. There was the familiar weight of having experienced yet another instance of discrimination, but there was also a sense of purpose, of opportunity. Tomorrow, the merger would be finalized, and with it would come the power to ensure that what had happened on this flight would never happen again. Not to him, not to anyone. Sometimes, meaningful change required being in a position to enforce it. The pieces were in place. The evidence was gathered. All that remained was the landing, both of the aircraft and of the consequences that would follow. Claudia rushed to the back galley, her movements stiff with barely contained panic. She grabbed her crew tablet with trembling fingers and quickly navigated to the airline's employee database. Her eyes darted nervously toward the cabin before she typed Derek Patterson into the search field. The results loaded almost instantly. Her face, already pale, lost the remainder of its color. Derek L. Patterson, CEO of Orion Jet Technologies, lead investor in the pending airline merger, net worth estimated at over $2 billion. The screen displayed his corporate headshot, the same face she had been deliberately mistreating for the past hour. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Her mind raced back to the merger proposal announcement that had circulated among staff 3 weeks ago. The memo had mentioned that Derek Patterson, as part of the deal, would assume full executive oversight of customer experience after the transition. There had also been a note about anonymous quality audits to evaluate current service standards. His idea. This flight wasn't just any flight. It was part of Patterson's evaluation of the airline he was about to acquire. Lars appeared. Beside her, his expression tense. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Claudia turned the tablet toward him wordlessly. Lars read quickly, his eyes widening with each line of text. "We're finished," he muttered. "Completely finished. He can't prove anything." Claudia replied, her voice wavering with uncertainty. "It's our word against his." Lars gave her an incredulous look. "He's the CEO of a tech company. You think he doesn't have evidence? The cabin has cameras. The whole system is probably feeding data directly to his team." The realization hit Claudia like a physical blow. Orion Jet Technologies specialized in airline management systems, including security and monitoring software. If anyone could access the cabin feeds, it would be Patterson. "I need to fix this," she said, straightening her uniform with shaking hands. "It's too late for that," Lars replied. But Claudia was already heading back into the cabin, a forced smile plastered on her face. She approached Derek's seat, carrying a glass of champagne on a small silver tray. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice artificially bright, "I'd like to offer you our finest champagne." Derek looked up from his tablet. His expression remained neutral, betraying neither anger nor satisfaction at her obvious discomfort. "No need for theatrics now," he said calmly, declining the offering with a small gesture. "What's done is done." The finality in his tone sent a chill down Claudia's spine. There would be no easy path to redemption, no quick fix for what had transpired. From across the aisle, Charles Kessler leaned forward abruptly, his earlier disdain replaced by eager recognition. "Wait, you're that Derek Patterson?" Kessler's voice carried a note of disbelief mixed with the sudden desperation of a man who realized he had severely miscalculated. "The tech investor? The one behind the Miller acquisition last year?" Aurex turned slightly toward Kessler but remained silent, letting the man's discomfort build. "Charles Kessler, Eastland Banking," Kessler continued, extending his hand across the aisle. "I think we may have mutual connections in the financial sector. Wilson at Goldman mentioned your name just last week. We should talk sometime." Derek glanced at the offered hand but made no move to accept it. After an uncomfortable moment, Kessler withdrew, his confidence visibly deflating. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Hollins had received Claudia's urgent message about their first class passenger's identity. His weathered face tightened as he read the notification. "Should have taken him off before takeoff," he muttered to his co-pilot Frank Wilson. "This is going to be a disaster." Wilson, a younger man in his mid-30s, looked confused. "What's going on? Who is he?" "The man who's about to own half this airline," Hollins replied grimly. "And apparently Reynolds has been giving him the special treatment." Wilson's eyes widened. "The bread and water thing? That was him?" He shook his head in disbelief. "Jesus, who approved this flight assignment?" Hollins didn't respond immediately, focusing on adjusting their approach path to JFK. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice low. "There's still the possibility of damage control. These rich types, they respond to the right approach. A personal apology from me might smooth things over." Wilson looked skeptical but said nothing, turning his attention back to the instruments. Back in the cabin, Derek received another text message from Harper. "We just pulled the security footage from the cabin. It's worse than we thought. Multiple violations, clear pattern of discriminatory behavior from several crew members. Legal is preparing briefing materials now." Derek typed a brief response. "Compile, send to legal, NPR." As he put his phone away, Emily leaned across the aisle again. "I'm a journalist," she said quietly, "with the Post. Would it be all right if I spoke with you on record about what I've witnessed here today?" The revelation added another layer to the unfolding situation. Derek studied Emily's face, recognizing now the practiced observation in her gaze. She hadn't just been a sympathetic bystander. She had been documenting the entire incident with a professional eye. "Not yet," he finally responded. "Let them finish digging." Emily nodded, understanding the strategic value of patience. Fair enough. But when you're ready to talk, I'd like to help tell this story the right way. The change in the cabin atmosphere was palpable now. Flight attendants who had previously ignored Derek suddenly appeared at regular intervals, offering pillows, blankets, and premium snacks, all of which he politely declined. The other first-class passengers watched with undisguised interest, many of them now attempting to piece together exactly who this man was and why the crew had so dramatically changed their behavior toward him. Claudia made another attempt, approaching Derek's seat with visible anxiety. She had clearly been crying in the galley, her makeup slightly smudged despite her efforts to repair it. "Mr. Patterson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were." Derek looked up at her, his expression neither angry nor forgiving, simply resolute. "And that's exactly the problem," he replied evenly. The words hung in the air between them, more damning than any accusation could have been. The implication was clear. Her behavior would have been unacceptable regardless of who he was, regardless of his title, his wealth, or his influence. Claudia opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, no defense forthcoming. After a moment of awkward silence, she retreated to the galley once more. Derek returned to his tablet, where another notification had appeared. A video of the bread and water incident had been uploaded to social media by another passenger and was already gaining traction. The hashtag #DonnerFlyingWhileBlack was trending, with users sharing their own experiences of discrimination during air travel. The airline's public relations nightmare was unfolding in real time, even as the flight continued its journey toward New York. Meanwhile, Harper had sent another update. Corporate security accessed Hollins's communications. He's planning to approach you after landing with a personal apology. Legal advises to avoid private conversation with him. Derek acknowledged the message, mentally adjusting his strategy. Every move now needed to be carefully considered, each interaction documented for what would come next. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into JFK. There was a subtle difference in his tone now, a forced pleasantness that hadn't been present in his earlier announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. The weather in New York is clear, with temperatures in the mid-60s. We should be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. On behalf of our entire crew, I'd like to thank you for choosing our airline today." As passengers began preparing for landing, securing loose items, and returning their seats to the upright position, Emily spoke to Derek again. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked perceptively. "This flight wasn't a coincidence." Derek considered her question carefully before responding. "Let's just say I wanted to see the airline's true colors before finalizing certain arrangements." "And what did you find?" Emily pressed gently. Derek glanced at the untouched bread and water still sitting on his tray table, a stark visual reminder of how his journey had begun. "Exactly what I suspected," he replied. "A culture problem that needs fixing from the top down." As the plane began its final approach, Derek received one more text from Harper. "Security teams in position at JFK. Legal and PR standing by. How? Do you want to proceed?" After a moment's consideration, Derek typed, "Wait for my word. I want to see how deep this goes." The message sent, he put his phone away and prepared for landing, and for the confrontation that would follow. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the final phase of their descent into JFK. The cabin lights brightened as flight attendants moved through the aisles, collecting any remaining service items and ensuring all passengers were prepared for landing. Derek placed his tablet back in his bag and calmly fastened his seatbelt. Through the window, he could see Manhattan in the distance, its skyline glittering against the darkening sky. In less than 24 hours, he would be in a boardroom on the 52nd floor of one of those gleaming towers, finalizing a merger that would reshape the airline industry. But first, there was unfinished business to attend to. Claudia approached him yet again, her earlier arrogance now completely replaced by naked anxiety. She leaned slightly closer than necessary, lowering her voice to ensure privacy. "Mr. Patterson, would you like a proper meal before we land?" she asked, desperation evident in her tone. "Our chef could prepare something special while we taxi to the gate." Derek looked up at her, his expression calm but unyielding. "I already ate," he replied evenly, then added with quiet emphasis, "Your true colors." The metaphorical blow landed with precision. Claudia flinched visibly, her last hope of an easy resolution evaporating. She nodded stiffly and continued down the aisle, her movements mechanical. Derek's phone vibrated with another message from Harper. "Legal is prepped. PR is holding the story until you land. Want them fired immediately upon touchdown?" He considered the question carefully. The easiest path would be immediate termination, a swift, decisive action that would signal zero tolerance for discrimination. But something deeper was at play here, a systemic issue that wouldn't be solved by simply removing a few problematic employees. "Wait for my word," he texted back. "I want to handle this personally." Harper's response came quickly. "Understood. Car will be waiting at the private terminal entrance." From across the aisle, Emily discreetly showed Derek her phone screen. She had been recording much of what had transpired, the bread and water scene, Claudia's tone, the passengers mocking him. The video was damning, showing clearly the pattern of mistreatment he had experienced. "I caught everything," she said quietly. "If you decide to make this public, I'd like to help shape the narrative. This isn't just about one bad flight attendant or one bad experience. It's about a culture that enables this behavior." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "Back it up and prepare a statement," he replied. "But hold until I give the word," Emily agreed, with a slight nod, tucking her phone away as Claudia passed by again. Meanwhile, Lars, the junior flight attendant who had remained mostly in the background during the flight, approached Derek's seat. His expression was different from Claudia's, less panicked, more genuinely remorseful. "Mr. Patterson," he began, his voice low, "I wanted to apologize. I didn't speak up when I should have. I saw what was happening and I just went along with it." He paused, searching for words. "I should have done something." Derek regarded him thoughtfully. There was something authentic in Lars's discomfort that had been missing from Claudia's performative apologies. "You still have time," Derek replied. "The right moment's coming." Lars seemed to understand the implication. He nodded slowly, a decision forming behind his eyes. "Thank you, sir," he said before returning to his duties. In the cockpit, Captain Hollins was on the radio with the ground crew, confirming their arrival gate. After completing the standard communication, he switched to the internal crew channel. "Everyone, behave," he instructed tersely. "We've got a storm coming when we land. Reynolds, you're to say nothing to Patterson beyond standard service phrases. Wilson, same for you. I'll handle the situation on the ground." Claudia's voice came back, tight with stress. "We'll keep him happy until then." "Too late for that," Hollins replied grimly. "Just don't make it worse. And delete any questionable entries from the service log before we reach the gate." What Hollins didn't know was that every word of this exchange was being transmitted not just to the crew, but also to OrionJet Technologies' security team, thanks to the proprietary communication system that Derek's company had installed throughout the airline's fleet months earlier as part of the pre-merger integration. As the plane glided through a layer of low clouds, Derek received a real-time update on his phone. News outlets were starting to pick up chatter about a racial incident aboard a premium airline flight. The story was gaining traction even before they landed, with social media users speculating about which airline and which flight was involved. The digital age had eliminated the buffer that once protected corporations from immediate accountability. By morning, this would be a full-blown PR crisis for the airline, unless managed properly. In the galley, Claudia frantically pulled Lars aside. "Delete any questionable entries from the flight service log," she whispered urgently. "Anything that might look bad, scrub it now before we land." Lars hesitated, clearly torn between self-preservation and doing the right thing. "I don't know, Claudia. That might make things worse. It could look like a cover-up." "It's already worse," she hissed. "Just do it. We need to protect ourselves." Lars nodded reluctantly, but as soon as Claudia turned away, he made a different decision. Instead of deleting entries, he discreetly used his phone to forward the complete, unaltered log to an email address, Harper's, though Claudia wouldn't know that until much later. The plane continued its descent, the landing gear extending with a mechanical thunk that vibrated through the cabin. The city grew larger in the windows, streetlights and car headlights creating rivers of illumination through the darkness. Claudia made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. She hurried to the first-class galley and pulled out a fancy dessert that had been reserved for special passengers, a chocolate mousse with gold leaf decoration. Placing it carefully on a china plate, she approached Derek's seat. "Mr. Patterson," she said, presenting the dessert with a forced smile. "Just a small gesture before we land." Derek glanced at the elaborate offering, then back at Claudia. Once again, he declined with a small shake of his head. "What you gave me before," he said quietly, gesturing toward the still untouched bread and water. "That was symbolic. Now it's on record forever." The simplicity of the statement, delivered without anger but with absolute certainty, made it all the more powerful. Claudia stood frozen for a moment, the reality of her situation finally sinking in completely. There would be no easy fix. No quick apology that would make this go away. She retreated to the galley for the final time, the untouched dessert still in her hands. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, instructing the cabin crew to take their seats for landing. The plane descended through the last layer of clouds, the runway lights now visible ahead. As the landing gear locked into place with a final mechanical clunk, Derek straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Beside him, the window reflected, his image, composed, focused, ready for what came next. He leaned slightly toward Emily and whispered, "Let's bring this plane to justice." Emily nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'm ready when you are." The plane touched down smoothly, tires meeting tarmac with a brief screech before the engines reversed thrust, slowing their momentum. As they taxied toward the terminal, Derek's phone vibrated once more. A message from Harper read, "Black SUVs and security positioned at Gate 37. Private entrance arranged. Media already gathering. Someone tipped them off." Derek typed back, "Proceed as planned. I'll handle the crew personally." He gazed out the window as they approached the gate. Through the darkness, he could see the distinctive silhouettes of several black vehicles positioned near a side entrance to the terminal. Airport security personnel stood at strategic points, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Captain Hollins's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport. Local time is 8:47 p.m., and the temperature is 64 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." There was a brief pause before he continued, his tone now carrying a forced warmth. "On behalf of our entire crew, I want to personally thank you for choosing to fly with us today. We hope your experience was a pleasant one." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on anyone in first class who had witnessed what had transpired. Several passengers exchanged glances, while Emily suppressed a small, disbelieving laugh. As the plane finally came to a stop at the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began to stand, retrieving items from overhead bins and preparing to disembark. But Derek remained seated, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, watching the crew's movements carefully. Claudia stood near the front galley, her expression a mixture of dread and resignation as she prepared for the door to open. Lars positioned, himself halfway down the aisle, occasionally glancing toward Derek with an uncertain expression. From his vantage point, Derek could see through the cockpit door as it opened. Captain Hollins emerged, straightening his uniform and putting on his cap. Their eyes met briefly, Hollins's narrowing slightly before he looked away, a muscle in his jaw tightening. The ground crew connected the jet bridge, and the cabin door was disarmed. Before it could be opened, however, Claudia made one last, desperate move. She quickly scribbled something on a napkin and approached Derek's seat, sliding the note onto his tray table. "I didn't mean to offend you," the hastily written message read. "Please understand it was a misunderstanding." Derek read the note, then handed it back to her without a word. As she reluctantly took it, he finally spoke. "Intent doesn't erase impact." The simple statement hung in the air between them, 4 words that encapsulated what Claudia had failed to understand throughout the entire encounter. It wasn't about What she had meant to do. It was about what she had actually done, the harm she had actually caused. Before Claudia could respond, the cabin door opened. Instead of the usual gate agent, however, 2 airport security officers stepped onto the plane. They were followed by a tall black woman in a tailored suit who Derek immediately recognized as Vanessa Mitchell, his company's head of security. "Mr. Patterson," Vanessa said with a professional nod. "Your car is waiting." "Thank you, Vanessa," Derek replied, standing and collecting his belongings. He turned to Emily. "I believe you'll want to come with us, Ms. Watson," she supplied. "Emily Watson, and yes, I would." Vanessa addressed the security officers. "Please ensure that Captain James Hollins, Flight Attendant Claudia Reynolds, and Flight Attendant Lars Wilson are escorted to the private conference room for the debriefing." Hollins stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Now wait just a minute. I have post-flight procedures to complete." "Your co-pilot can handle them," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "This takes precedence." One of the security officers moved toward Hollins, his posture making it clear that compliance wasn't optional. After a moment of tense silence, Hollins relented, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's get this over with." As passengers began to disembark, hushed conversations and curious glances followed Derek and the crew. Word had spread quickly. Someone important had been on the flight, someone who had been mistreated, and now consequences were unfolding in real time. Derek paused at the cabin door, looking back at the first-class cabin one last time. The bread and water still sat on his tray table, untouched. Physical evidence of the incident that would soon become the catalyst for significant change. He turned and stepped onto the jet bridge, where Harper was waiting with a tablet in hand, ready to brief him on the arrangements for what would come next. "Everything's in place," Harper said quietly as they walked. "The executives are already in the conference room along with legal counsel. PR has prepared 3 different statements, depending on how you want to proceed." Derek nodded, his mind already focused on the confrontation ahead. "And the documentation? All secured," Harper confirmed. "Video, audio, text logs, everything. They don't have a leg to stand on." As they reached the terminal, Derek could see camera crews positioned near the main exits, evidence that news of the incident had indeed leaked to the media. But Vanessa guided their group toward a side corridor, away from the press and curious onlookers. "Are you ready for this?" Harper asked as they approached the private conference room where the airline executives waited. Derek straightened his tie one final time, his expression resolute. "I've been ready my entire life." The door opened, revealing a room full of nervous executives and the 3 crew members who had been at the center of the incident. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The plane had landed smoothly at JFK, but for Claudia Reynolds, Captain James Hollins, and Lars Wilson, the real turbulence was just beginning. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Derek watched through the window as black SUVs lined the tarmac. Airport security personnel stood at attention, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Harper had arranged a media-quiet disembarkation plan, not to shield the airline from scrutiny, but to ensure that Derek maintained control of the narrative. This confrontation would happen on his terms, not in the chaotic environment of a crowded terminal with smartphone cameras capturing every moment. Just before the plane doors opened, Claudia made one final desperate attempt to salvage her career. She approached Derek's seat, a handwritten note clutched in her trembling fingers. "I didn't mean to offend you," the hastily scribbled message read. Derek read it, his expression unchanging, then handed it back to her. His voice was quiet, but carried unmistakable authority when he spoke. "Intent doesn't erase impact." The words hung in the air between them, a simple truth that cut through all excuses and justifications. Claudia's face crumpled slightly as she accepted the note back, the full weight of her actions finally sinking in. As the doors opened, airport security boarded first, not to arrest anyone, but to ensure an orderly process. The lead officer, a tall man with a stern expression, approached Derek respectfully. "Mr. Patterson, we've been instructed to escort you and to secure these crew members for questioning," he said, gesturing toward Claudia, Lars, and Captain Hollins, who had emerged from the cockpit. Derek nodded. "Thank you. Please ensure it's handled discreetly." The officer turned to the 3 crew members. "You'll come with us, please. This way." Holland stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "On what authority?" "I have post-flight procedures to complete." "On the authority of airport security in cooperation with federal transportation officials," the officer replied evenly. "Your co-pilot can handle the procedures. This takes precedence." The fight seemed to drain out of Holland's. He nodded stiffly, following the officers toward the exit. Claudia walked behind him, her shoulders hunched, while Lars brought up the rear, his expression a mixture of resignation and relief, as if a burden he'd carried for too long was finally being addressed. The regular passengers began to disembark. Curious whispers spread through the cabin. Many had noticed the security presence, and word quickly circulated that something significant had occurred. Some recognized Derek from business publications or tech news. Others pieced together the situation from fragments of what they had witnessed during the flight. Emily Watson, the journalist, stayed close to Derek as they exited the aircraft. "They're already speculating," she murmured, nodding toward the passengers who were glancing back at them. "The story's getting out, whether you control it or not." "That's why we need to get ahead of it," Derek replied quietly. "Real change requires more than just firing a few people. It requires public accountability." As they walked through the jet bridge, Harper met them at the terminal entrance, tablet in hand. "Everything's ready," she reported efficiently. The executives are waiting in conference room A. Legal and PR are standing by." Derek nodded. "And the evidence?" "All secured and organized," Harper confirmed. "Video feeds, audio recordings, time-stamped communications, everything. We've also collected statements from 6 passengers who witnessed the incidents." The small group moved through a private corridor, bypassing the main terminal where several news crews had already gathered. Through a glass partition, Derek could see reporters setting up equipment, clearly waiting for something or someone. "How did they find out so quickly?" he asked. Harper checked her tablet. "Social media. The video from first class has over 50,000 views already. Bread is not service is trending." Derek absorbed this information with a slight nod. The digital age had eliminated the buffer that once protected corporations from immediate accountability. By morning, this would be a full-blown PR crisis for the airline, unless managed properly. They were led to a spacious conference room where a group of anxious-looking executives in expensive suits stood as Derek entered. At the head of the table sat Richard Barton, the airline's CEO, his normally confident demeanor replaced by visible concern. "Derek," Barton began, stepping forward with an extended hand. "I can't express how deeply troubled I am by what I'm hearing. If there's been any misunderstanding—" "There's no misunderstanding, Richard," Derek interrupted calmly, accepting the handshake, but not the excuse. Everything was quite clear. He gestured toward the 3 crew members who had been seated at the far end of the table, security personnel standing discreetly behind them. Claudia stared at the polished wood surface, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Holland sat rigidly upright, his jaw clenched in defiance, while Lars seemed resigned but oddly calm. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Barton suggested, glancing nervously at Emily Watson, who had taken out a notebook. "Ms. Watson is here at my invitation," Derek replied. "As a journalist, she witnessed the entire incident firsthand. Her perspective will be valuable." He walked to the center of the room, not taking a seat, but standing where everyone could see him. The power dynamic was impossible to miss. Derek was in full CEO mode now, his earlier quiet demeanor replaced by the commanding presence that had built Orion Jet Technologies into a billion-dollar company. "I didn't need to play your game," he said, addressing the crew members directly. "I own the board." The statement was simple but profound. He hadn't been powerless during their mistreatment. He had chosen to observe, to document, to build a case that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Harper handed him a tablet, and he swiped through several screens before continuing. "Let's review exactly what happened today, shall we?" One by one, he read out the violations, his voice calm but unyielding. discriminatory service protocols, targeted humiliation of a passenger based on perceived status, racially biased behavior, documented on multiple occasions, deliberate sabotage of passenger dignity and comfort. With each charge, he displayed corresponding evidence on the large screen at the front of the room. Screenshots of the cabin feed showing Claudia delivering the bread and water, audio recordings of her comments, timestamps of service denials, and logs of the crew's private communications. Barton's face grew increasingly pale as the evidence mounted. Several of the other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances. This wasn't just a bad service incident. It was a systematic pattern of behavior that could not be dismissed as a one-time lapse in judgment. Claudia, unable to contain herself any longer, burst out. "It wasn't just me. Lars was following my instructions. He's equally responsible." The attempt to deflect blame fell flat as Lars straightened in his seat. "Actually," he said quietly, "I have something you should hear." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he played an audio recording, Claudia instructing him to delete entries from the service log before landing, followed by her comments about Coach Guy and her laughter at Kessler's racist remarks. The room fell dead silent. Even Hollins, who had maintained his defiant posture throughout, seemed to deflate slightly. Lars placed his phone on the table. "I've been documenting incidents like this for months," he admitted. "I was too afraid to come forward until now, but I can't be part of this anymore." His unexpected testimony shifted the dynamic in the room completely. What had begun as an isolated incident now appeared to be part of a pattern, one that had been allowed to continue unchecked by airline management. Holland, sensing the walls closing in, tried to distance himself from the situation. "I was in the cockpit the entire time," he insisted. "I had no knowledge of what was happening in the cabin. I can't be held responsible for the actions of flight attendants." Harper stepped forward, tapping her tablet. "Actually, Captain Hollins, we have this." She played a cockpit recording where Hollins clearly stated, "Should have taken him off before takeoff," followed by his instructions to Claudia to delete evidence and keep him happy until we land. The airline's legal representative, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, closed her laptop with a decisive click. "This is indefensible," she stated flatly. "All three of you are culpable." Derek turned to Barton. "Richard, as of this moment, these three are terminated. Their union will be notified, and every record of this flight has been archived for civil rights review." Barton nodded, his earlier defensive posture completely abandoned. "Of course, effective immediately." He turned to the three crew members. "Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." Claudia began to cry openly now, while Hollins stared straight ahead, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Lars, surprisingly, appeared almost relieved, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. As security prepared to escort them out, Derek raised a hand. "One moment." He approached Lars directly. "You eventually did the right thing, even if it took too long. That counts for something." Lars met his gaze for the first time. "Too little, too late, I suppose." "That depends on what you do next," Derek replied. "Real change requires people willing to speak the truth, especially when it's difficult." The implication was clear. Lars might have lost his job, but his journey wasn't necessarily over. The way forward would depend on his willingness to continue standing up for what was right. As the three former employees were escorted from the room, Barton turned to Derek, his expression grave. "What happens now? The merger will proceed as planned," Derek interrupted. "But with significant modifications to the terms. We're not just merging companies, we're transforming a culture." He gestured to Harper, who distributed tablets, to each executive around the table. "These contain the new conditions. You'll find them non-negotiable." The executives began reviewing the documents, their expressions shifting from concern to outright alarm as they realized the sweeping changes Derek was proposing: mandatory bias training for all staff, new oversight committees, anonymous testing, protocols, and significant penalties for violations. "This is extensive," Barton said carefully. So was the problem, Derek replied simply. You can sign today, or we can walk away. Your choice. As the executives huddled to discuss their limited options, Emily approached Derek. That was impressive, she said quietly. But what happens tomorrow, after the news cycle moves on? Derek smiled slightly. That's where you come in. This isn't just about one flight or one company. It's about changing the conversation. Emily nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. I can help with that. Outside the conference room, Harper's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then showed the screen to Derek. The hashtag #BreadIsNotService had exploded online, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. The story was taking on a life of its own, becoming something larger than a single incident on a single flight. It was becoming a movement. And that, Derek reflected, was exactly what he had hoped for. Real change rarely came from quiet settlements or private apologies. It came from public reckonings, from moments when the usually invisible became impossible to ignore. Tomorrow would bring a new phase, the hard work of rebuilding, of transforming outrage into action. But for tonight, justice had been served. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel conference room where Derek Patterson stood before a sea of cameras and microphones. 24 hours after landing at JFK, he was addressing the media with Harper and Emily Watson flanking him on either side. The room was packed with journalists, industry representatives, and social media influencers, all drawn by the viral story that had exploded overnight. Derek adjusted the microphone slightly before speaking, his voice steady and measured. Yesterday, I was denied a meal on a flight, but more importantly, I was denied humanity. What happened to me wasn't unique or unusual. It happens every day to countless travelers who don't have the platform or power that I do. The cameras flashed as he continued. This isn't about bread and water. This isn't even about one airline or one flight crew. This is about a culture that allows some people to be treated as less deserving of dignity than others. He gestured to Emily, who stepped forward. Over the past 24 hours, she had transformed from a witness to a partner in Derek's efforts, working through the night to prepare a feature titled Discrimination at 40,000 Feet. As a journalist, I've covered many stories of discrimination, Emily began. But rarely have I witnessed it unfold so blatantly, with such casual cruelty. What struck me most wasn't just the actions of the crew, but how normalized the behavior seemed to be, as if this was simply how things were done. Her passionate delivery captivated the room. The most important thing is that we all recognize our responsibility to stand up, even when we're not the target. Silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. The room erupted in applause as Emily concluded her remarks. Derek stepped forward again, his expression resolute as he outlined the changes that would be implemented immediately. Today I'm announcing several policy changes that will take effect across the entire airline, he stated. First, we're implementing anonymous flight evaluations that will be conducted regularly, with results reported directly to executive leadership. He continued, detailing a comprehensive plan that included mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, revised service protocols designed to ensure consistent treatment of all passengers, and perhaps most significantly, the creation of the Orion Sky Equity Division, a new department tasked specifically with monitoring and improving the passenger experience for all travelers, regardless of background. This division will be led by individuals who understand these challenges firsthand, Derek explained, including former passengers who have experienced discrimination and even staff members who have had the courage to speak up about problematic practices. To the surprise of many in the room, Lars Wilson stepped onto the stage. He looked different now, more confident, his expression open and determined rather than nervous. I was on that flight, Lars admitted, his voice slightly unsteady at first, but growing stronger as he continued. I witnessed the discrimination, and I failed to intervene immediately. That failure will always be part of my story. But what I've learned is that it's not enough to not be racist. You have to stand up when others are. His candid admission resonated with the audience. Here was someone who had been part of the problem, now publicly committing to be part of the solution. Mr. Patterson has given me a second chance, Lars continued, not as a flight attendant, but as part of the new accountability team. My job now is to help train staff to recognize and prevent the very behaviors I once failed to stop. The redemptive arc of Lars's story provided a powerful counterpoint to the harsh consequences faced by Claudia and Captain Hollins. While they had refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing, Lars had chosen a different path, one of honesty, accountability, and growth. As the press conference continued, reporters asked about the status of Claudia Reynolds and James Hollins. Derek's response was measured but firm. Their employment has been terminated, and their cases have been referred to the appropriate regulatory agencies for review. Beyond that, I won't comment on individual personnel matters. What he didn't say, but what many in the industry already knew, was that Claudia and Hollins had become instantly infamous. Their names and faces had spread across social media overnight, their past misconduct now exposed to public scrutiny. Several former passengers had come forward with their own stories of mistreatment at their hands, creating a damning pattern that stretched back years. The airline had attempted some damage control, issuing statements distancing themselves from the actions of a few individuals and emphasizing their commitment to inclusivity. But it was too late. The narrative had already been established, and Derek was the one controlling it. After the press conference, Derek spent the afternoon in meetings with airline executives and industry regulators, hammering out the details of the merger and the new policies that would accompany it. The dynamics had shifted dramatically. He was no longer just another business partner, but a symbol of change in an industry long criticized for its uneven treatment of passengers. Later, that week, Derek visited a classroom of young black students at a STEM-focused charter school in Brooklyn. Sitting casually on the edge of a desk, he spoke to them not as a billionaire tech executive, but as someone who understood their experiences. "Don't let anyone decide your worth by the seat you're in," he told them, his words carrying the weight of personal experience. "Whether it's a seat on a plane, in a classroom, or in a boardroom, you belong there if you've earned it. And even if you haven't earned it yet, you deserve the same respect as anyone else." A young girl raised her hand. "What if you do everything right and they still treat you badly?" Derek considered her question carefully. "Then you document it," he answered honestly. "You gather evidence, you find allies, and when the time is right, you use whatever platform you have to make change, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you." Social media exploded with support for Derek's approach. The image of the bread and water, captured by multiple passengers and shared thousands of times, had become a powerful symbol, sparking the viral hashtag, "Bread is not service." People from all walks of life began sharing their own experiences of being treated as less than, not just on airlines, but in restaurants, hotels, stores, and workplaces. What had begun as one man's experience had evolved into a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the subtle and not so subtle ways that bias manifests in everyday interactions. Emily's feature article was published to critical acclaim, presenting a nuanced analysis that went beyond simple villains and heroes to examine the systemic issues that allowed such behaviors to flourish unchecked. She focused not just on what had happened on the flight, but on the broader patterns it represented, and the potential for real change that Derek's response had created. One evening, a week after the incident, Derek sat alone in his home office, jazz playing softly in the background as he reviewed the final merger documents. The gentle notes of a Thelonious Monk piano solo filled the room, creating a peaceful atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the turbulence of recent days. He texted Harper. This wasn't about a meal. It was about a message. Her reply came quickly. "And you delivered it," Derek smiled, setting his phone aside and leaning back in his chair. The merger would be finalized tomorrow, the beginning of a new chapter not just for his company, but for an entire industry. There would be resistance, of course. Change never came easily, especially when it challenged entrenched behaviors and attitudes. But the momentum was building, and he was prepared for the long game. Weeks later, Derek boarded another flight, this time to London for a technology conference. The experience could not have been more different from that fateful day. As he stepped onto the plane, he was greeted warmly by a diverse crew who addressed him respectfully, not because of who he was, but because that was now the standard for all passengers. The new training protocols had been implemented across the fleet, and anonymous evaluators regularly traveled on flights to ensure compliance. Derek settled into his seat, and a flight attendant promptly offered him the menu, along with a glass of water. "Would you like to see our dinner options, sir?" she asked, her manner professional and courteous. "Yes, thank you," he replied, accepting the menu with a smile. A proper meal was placed in front of him without fanfare, not as a special accommodation, but as the basic service any passenger should expect. It was a small thing, perhaps, but symbolic of the larger changes taking place. As the plane took off, climbing into the clear blue sky, Derek gazed out the window at the receding landscape. Below, the incident that had sparked this journey was now part of a larger narrative, one about accountability, transformation, and the long necessary work of creating spaces where everyone was treated with dignity. He smiled faintly, comfortable in the knowledge that his actions had set something important in motion. It wasn't just about one flight or one airline anymore. It was about changing expectations, about showing what was possible when people refused to accept discriminatory treatment as normal or inevitable. Turning his attention back to his tablet, Derek began reviewing notes for his upcoming presentation on ethical technology development. There was still so much work to be done, so many systems that needed rebuilding from the ground up. But for now, in this moment, he could take satisfaction in knowing that something meaningful had changed. He was flying, truly flying, at last. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more narratives that challenge us to examine the subtle and not so subtle injustices we witness every day.